Sigeleli Afrika, maluparadisu ponolayo, Israeli tanaso yetu, Osi sigelela china, lusapolwayo, Urela huluka sichama sa Yesu, Usibuluke, sichabasa, Yesu, sichabasa, South Africa, South Africa.
The Government Communication and Information System was formally established in terms of Section 239 of the Constitution as a strategic unit in the Presidency. The GCIS vision is to be the pulse of communication excellence in government by delivering best practice in communication service and by engaging with citizens and other stakeholders. GCIS is mandated to coordinate, guide, and advise on government communication, which includes media liaison development, communication, and marketing. The coordination of communication ensures that government messaging is clear and coherent, and that public information allows citizens to access services and resources that can help them improve their quality of life and build stronger and empowered communities. The Director General and Accounting Officer of the GCIS is also the Cabinet spokesperson. GCIS's three key core programs are corporate services, content processing and dissemination, intergovernmental coordination and stakeholder management. Corporate services provide strategic leadership management and support service to the department. Content processing and dissemination is a hub of campaign management, media buying, communications research, print and online publishing, and social engagement. The product and platforms produce Vukuzenzele newspaper, the Public Sector Manager magazine, the South Africa Yearbook, and the Official Guide to South Africa. The sub-program provides language service for products that require writing, translation, editing, and proofreading. It manages the South African Government web portal and the GCIS website, as well as social engagement. Products and Platforms is also the home of the government news agency sanews.gov.za, which keeps citizens in South Africa and stakeholders on the continent and around the world updated on developments in government and the public sector more broadly. Policy and Research conducts research through independent service providers to assess how government should address the public's information needs. It also monitors the media coverage of issues affecting government in the country. The GCIS's Communication Service Agency provides media bulk buying services and media production services to government. It also develops distribution strategies for all government communication and overseers distribution services that are contracted to service providers in the private sector. The sub-program manages national government's corporate identity and supports GCIS and other government departments with marketing and distribution services. The agency produces content for out-of-home placement, print and broadcast advertising, and designs commemorative and occasional publications. Photographic and audiovisual crews are deployed around the country and around the world to document the activities of the President, Deputy President, and other government leaders. GCIS's entity oversight provides support and exercises oversight over public entities and report to GCIS to ensure that government is sound and ethical and that the entity programs are impactful. The two public entities resorting under the GCIS are Brand South Africa, or in short, Brand SA, and the Media Development and Diversity Agency, or the MDDA. Media Policy conducts research and develops policy proposals around the development of the media sector in South Africa. The third and final GCIS program is Intergovernmental Coordination and Stakeholder Management. Its purpose is to provide leadership and strategic advice to provincial and local government communication systems. Its aim is to strengthen the system of government communication and to implement face-to-face direct communication through sound stakeholder relations and partnerships. It also has to ensure that the public remains informed about government policies and programs to improve their lives. Media engagement leads and drives interaction and communication between government and the media. The unit ensures effective liaison between ministers, senior public servants, and the media. Provincial and local liaison implements outreach programs to widen access to government programs and policies by the public. The sub-program is responsible for promoting Tusong service centers as well as ensuring that government departments send printed products and materials to these centers. It also supports the district campaign program of government in line with the district development model. The Government Communication and Information System is committed to maintaining a constant flow of communication between government and its citizens, a hallmark of true democracy.
Good day, everyone, and once again, welcome to the GCIS Africa webinar series. Today is one of those great days. We have got a great panelist that will be debating and discussing the Africa Integrated Maritime Strategy. And just to give you insights of where we are 10 years later after the African Union developed this strategy. Today I have on my panel Mr. Vusi September, the Executive Director, Corporate Services, Corporate Affairs at the South African Maritime Safety Authority, Mr. Joy Malepile, the Head of Automotive and Transport Equipment at the IDC, And then we're also going to have Captain Thokozani Mtetwa, all the way from Cape Town, the Deputy of Harbour Master at Transnet. And obviously, we will never do anything without the workers in the center of things. So Mr. Matthew Parks will be the last speaker. He's the parliamentary coordinator at COSATU. So allow me to start and say South Africa has about 3,000 kilometers of coastline and more than 1.5 square meters of ocean area that comprises of our exclusive economic zone. Maritime is a critical vein of South African economy. The bulk of South African trade is seaborne and moves into system of commercial ports of the country. It is estimated that seaborne trade accounts between 80 to 90% of the South African economy. In light of that, it is important that we note that this maritime sector is the life and blood of our well-being and indeed the continent. So South Africa has put its own strategy aligned to the integrated maritime strategy of the AU, which is Africa-driven, all-inclusive, long-term vision to address these multifaceted maritime challenges and opportunities. My name is Ayanda Holo. I will be taking you through this conversation. So I'm going to start with Mr. September to kick us off and give us a picture of like, why did we need this strategy?
Okay, thank you kindly, moderator, Mr. Holo, and a very good morning to you, sir. Good morning to fellow speakers today, as well as the members of the audience, distinguished guests. The talk today from our side, colleagues, is packaged into a formal PowerPoint presentation. Just need to confirm, Mr. Holo, if the presentation is already showing. It's coming. Yes, and as I have been introduced, my name is Vusi September, and I'm with the South African Maritime Safety Authority, SAMSA, which is an implementing arm of the National Department of Transport. And I will be giving you a 10-minute presentation over about 19 slides. So I'm going to try and manage the time such that I spend about 2 minutes per slide. The outline of the presentation, as you can see it on the screen, colleagues, I'm going to give you a little bit overview of who we are at SAMSA. Then I will then take you to the Africa Maritime Transport facts and figures, touch on the situation leading to the development of the 2050 AIM strategy as well as its vision. And then I will also touch a bit on the blue economy, because this is where the AIM's 2050 strategy falls under within the AU structure. Then I will spend a few minutes on the Africa Maritime Governance Framework. I will drive through very fast the objectives of both the 2050 aims as well as the revised African Maritime Transport Charter. Then I would like to spend more time on management of maritime risks, the frameworks that exist there, they are functional, as well as how we manage maritime risks in South Africa. Then I will also touch a bit on the promotion and growth of the African ship registers, and zooming again on the South African Ship Register as a contribution to the Continental Ship Registry. And then I'll spend a bit of time also on some of the opportunities. I've decided not to talk too much about the challenges, Mr. Holo and colleagues. If we can move to the next slide. The slide just outlines the mandate of the South African Maritime Safety Authority. We're obviously established in terms of Act number 5 of 1998, mainly responsible for ensuring safety of life and property at sea, preventing and combating pollution of the maritime environment by ships, and I think most importantly also to promote South Africa's maritime call this particular strategic objective loosely maritime industry development, which is also very appropriate. You can move to the next slide. And after the establishment of the entity, obviously empowered by the SAMSA Act, the Minister of Transport then introduced some additional functions. in our Center for Sea Watch and Response located in Plattekloof in Cape Town. We also manage on behalf of the National Department of Transport, the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, which operates a 24/7 service, and as well as the addition of a small vessels administration, which is more on the ships that operate in inland waters. If you can move to the next slide. And colleagues, before we really get into the real discussion, I think it's important again that we remind each other of what our continent is endowed with. We are obviously gifted with maritime transport and port platforms that have historically occupied a strategic place in the development of world trade. So we somehow indirectly or indirectly do influence how global shipping is performed. We are surrounded by forces on the west, east, south, and the north, and arguably some call us a continent island. We have a combined coastline of plus minus 31,000 kilometers. 70% of the 55 states that make up the continent are either coastal or island in nature. We have about 90 main ports in the continent, with more other ports offering in the main services for fishing and marine tourism. And despite all of the above good things that we have mentioned, colleagues, and as well as accelerated by the intensification of trade relations that we're recently having with the Asian continent in particular, the continent's share represents about 3% of world's share of international freight transport, about 5% of world trade, and less than 3% share of global seafaring community, and less than 3% of the world's container traffic, which therefore means that with all the natural gifts that we are given in terms of location and everything around that, we still are not playing a significant role in global shipping. And I think Mr. Hollow did say earlier on that about 90% of imports and exports are conducted by sea in our continent. And lastly, colleagues, just to mention that the continent represents the largest number of land-linked countries globally. 15 of them are actually land-linked. I think there was a visible move from the restrictive terminology that was used in the past to say these countries are landlocked, but now are land-linked. It's a liberative terminology. And some of the things that really compelled the continent and guided by the AU to really look into the development and adoption of 2050 aims is that at the time, Africa represented less than 0.9% of global gross tonnage, which hasn't improved significantly to date. The minimum loss of IUU fishing that is illegal, unregulated, as well as unprotected fishing cost the continent more than 100 billion US dollars at the time. Dumping of toxic waste in various parts of the continent. We've made examples on the screen of the 2006 incident in Abidjan in Ivory Coast, which affected about 108,000 people and resulted in 15 deaths, as well as in 2020 an incident that affected about 18,000 people in northern Nigeria. And also at the time, environmental crimes that were committed in the African waters in as far as oil spills cleanup are concerned is that it cost the continent about 2 billion rands, taking about 30 years to finish those cleanup operations, and then 2,000 of marine hectares also destroyed in the process. Then our leaders also looked at the fact that the continent also experienced about 100 billion US dollars from illegal bunkering between the period 2003 and 2008. Then we also faced piracy and armed robbery challenges in the West and in the East and West Africa, some incidents of terrorism, human trafficking, as well as drug trafficking, as well as what is already engulfing the globe now, incidence of climate change. If we can move to the next slide. And therefore, the vision, colleagues, with all the challenges that were faced at the time, was to develop an African-driven solution, and a solution that is multi-layered, overarching, inclusive, and also multidisciplinary and coherent. And lastly, long-term vision to address Africa's multifaceted maritime challenges and opportunities. Yes, it's a very clear vision. You can move on to the next slide. And as I said earlier on, in the earlier days, as you will see in the framework that I referred to earlier on, the drive was really to establish a standalone maritime affairs department within the AU at the time. But we understand that due to financial constraints, that could not happen, and you will therefore find the blue economy a unit located within the Department of Rural Development, Agriculture, as well as environmental sustainability within the AU. And some of the aspects of the blue economy that I thought we will also just remind ourselves about is that it refers to maximum economic benefit presented by the ocean while preserving it, and therefore extracting what we need to extract from the ocean, but doing so in a sustainable manner. And then the concept in the main simultaneously promotes social inclusion, environmental sustainability, strengthening of the maritime ecosystem, transparent governance, as well as economic growth and development. It also promotes national equity in terms of gender equity, inclusive growth, and the creation of meaningful jobs for all. And I must say that given the statistics that we know we're grappling with currently, is the creation of jobs for young people as well as women across the continent. I think we may also add that it is predicted or forecasted that by 2050, Africa would have tripled its population by 2050, and we will also be continuously known as the youngest population globally, and therefore some of the answers what we need to understand and also answer today is what is it that we are going to do to cater for those young people that will be looking up to all of us come 2050. If you move on to the next slide. Briefly, colleagues, the framework that governs the maritime transport in the continent simply covers a number of things which I will also not dwell into too much into. On your far left, or my far left, could be far right on your side, is the overarching convention of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which really provides basic framework for international transport law, as well as the two instruments from the African Union. One is the original African Maritime Charter, and then later to be revised and be known as the revised African Maritime Transport Charter, which also makes a number of provisions and statements and articles that are geared towards really assisting in the implementation of the 2050 aims strategy. And then that is followed by what we are discussing today, the strategy itself, colleagues, which was also in the main also about making sure that there is a framework for the protection and sustainable exploitation of the integrated African maritime sector domain for wealth creation. Then the other assumptions that were then also made, colleagues, for us to be able to really drive the implementation of the strategy was that there would be African maritime councils at the continental, regional, as well as national level. There are also, I did mention earlier on that there was also an assumption that there will be an establishment of an AU Department of Maritime Affairs supported by a panel of champions. Then in terms of managing then the risks that emanate from shipping that transverses our waters around the continent. There are a number of MOUs that I will talk to later on. I'll just mention them in the meantime, which is the Indian Ocean MOU, the Abuja MOU, as well as the Djibouti Code of Conduct. Those are some of the frameworks that have been put in place to assist us to manage the operation of substandard ships in our waters. And in the next slide, I then also thought it would be prudent just to remind colleagues that the strategy was not just developed, but it was also dedicated to the memory of those who died at sea trying to earn a better quality of life, and of those who passed away on the oceans in the course of the slave trade, colonialism, and the fight for Africa's self-determination and independence. I think this is a very important reminder to all of us who occupy important or influential positions in our various corners, whether in the communities where we live or in the private or as well as in the public sector. As I said earlier on, colleagues, in the interest of time, I will not go into detail on the objectives of the aims, but I would like to also just mention a few things, some of which we have spoken about earlier. If we focus on bullet number 2, the objective, one of the objectives is to engage civil society and all other stakeholders to improve awareness on maritime issues. I suspect this is what Mr. Holo also was calling us to do earlier on. The fourth bullet is to enhance wealth creation, regional and international trade performance through maritime-centric capacity and capability building. And the bullet number 6, as I mentioned also when I was looking at the situation building up to the development of the strategy, the objective is also to protect populations, including Africa, maritime domain heritage, assets, critical infrastructure, from maritime pollution and dumping of toxic and nuclear waste. And then most importantly, colleagues, third from the bottom, this is to also promote ratification, domestication, and implementation of international legal instruments. I cannot stress this one more, colleagues, in the sense that some of the challenges that we face as African continents is that some of our jurisdictions have not established standalone maritime administrations in their countries, and therefore the maritime unit still forms part of the National Department of Transportation. And this obviously is encouraged that each country has a standalone maritime administration. It has its own benefits for the continent as well as individual countries. And some of the important things are that we then need to follow the IMO directives in terms of acceding to at least the key IMO conventions that govern shipping globally. The other challenges that we obviously face as the continent is that I suspect linked to the fact that some of our countries don't have standalone maritime administrations. We then also do not pay our dues at the IMO, which also makes it impossible for such countries and the continent as well to participate fully at IMO discussions, voting for decisions or against decisions that we would like to vote for in support of developing countries. And that is just a lost opportunity, colleagues. And then on the REC's strategies, I'm specifically looking at the SADC protocol, which we are part of. Some of the things that we are looking at there, or we are supposed to be looking at, is maximization of regional and international trade and exchange, the provision of frameworks for economic and concomitant institutional restructuring, the establishment of customer-sensitive and needs-driven approach, and the promotion and the establishment of integrated transport system. And this should all then aggregate into an integrated continental system. If we then move over to the next slide, which covers the African Maritime Transport Charter, which we spoke to when we dealt with the framework earlier on. On my side, I've highlighted the Association of African Maritime Administrations. There's quite a number of proposals in the charter. I must also mention that the charter is still falling short of adequate ratifications for it to come into effect. It's supposed to have at least 15 ratifications for it to come into effect and start functioning, and so that all of the other proposals and the pronouncements in the charter can be well and formally established, and that they can be well managed and well run. One of the important ones, again, if we look at management of maritime safety and maritime pollution, as well as maritime risks in general, is the establishment of the Association of Maritime Administrations. I can safely say that there is a structure currently that is functioning, but obviously will never function optimally until there is a full ratification by 15 nations that are supposed to ratify it. But it's currently in place since 2013, was established in Sandton, South Africa, and it's doing its bit at the moment, as well as the recognition of other organizations that are supposed to assist in the implementation of the strategy, like your African Shippers Council, Association of African Ports, African Ship Owners Council, Association of African Maritime Companies, as well as Association of African Maritime Training, Education, and Research. The last one is actually very important because that is the instrument that is supposed to ensure that our training, our education and training systems across the continent develop and produce good quality seafarers that can gain employment everywhere in the world. And therefore, it is important that there is collaboration and synergy, sharing of information, knowledge, and resources across all of this in the continent. I can confirm that in South Africa, we've got SAIMI, which is in Mandela University in Port Elizabeth, and quite a number of other world-class, I dare to say, education institutions, the likes of your CPUT in the Western Cape, as well as the Durban University of Technology in KZN. If we then move over to the next slide, then colleagues, I just touch on some of the things that are going well at the moment. I mentioned the Indian Ocean MOU, and all of those, at least in our view and the views of the observers, even at the IMO level, these are functioning very well. The Indian Ocean MOU, which is more occupied with the identification and elimination of standard ships from the region through port state control inspections, that is happening and is doing very well. The Abuja MOU, which is also focused on developing a system of harmonizing port state control inspections procedures for the region, mainly also aimed at eliminating substandard shipping, prevention of marine pollution, and improvement of the living and working conditions of seafarers on board the ships that do business in the African continent. And then lastly, colleagues, the Djibouti Code of Conduct, which is also an instrument that is instrumental in repressing piracy and armed robbery against ships in the Western Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. And its scope was also recently expanded to also cover other illicit maritime activities, including human trafficking and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing that we spoke about earlier on. So all of these formations and structures assist both in making sure that our waters are safe and that they are free of toxic dumping of unwanted materials that we spoke about earlier on. Then just zooming into South Africa, and as I mentioned earlier on, SAMSA in partnership with the National Department of Transport as well as the private sector in 2019 conducted what we called a maritime risk workshop in Cape Town with stakeholders to identify risks posed with dealing with emergencies and pollution incidents in South Africa. And that was followed in 2020 by an internal review of the maritime domain awareness on the current capability and our needs analysis. And then the last one of the recent assessments that we made, what we did was in 2021, where we commissioned an external research project focusing mainly on the analysis of marine traffic density flows, maritime risks, current rescue craft response capability, places of refuge, as well as strategic recommendations and gap analysis. If we can then go on to the next slide, we can confirm that having looked at the assets that we have available to us, both aerial and surface, we can confirm that a combined inventory in the South African continent, as I said, combining public and private sector marine resources, includes about 32 small tugs that may be available to render assistance in the event of a huge maritime incident, one emergency towing vessel that SAMSA has got access to but are contracted to the Department of Transport, 9 fisheries patrol research vessels that are at the moment in the main managed by SAMSA in our Marine Special Projects division located in the Western Cape in Cape Town, 2 times Tier 3 salvage companies. Some of the managers of these companies are world-class and are known everywhere in the world and are called for their services to assist in some of the huge incidents that happened elsewhere in the globe. About 38 National Sea Rescue Institute bases that we also have access to, as well as 3 oil spill response companies. Then with that, colleagues, the message is that in as much as not everything is in place, because from a SAMSA point of view, which is a maritime safety authority of our own country, we do not have at the moment adequate resources that we've got immediate access to. We've got to work through this national arrangement with the private sector. But it's matters that we have tabled with the National Department of Transport, and we've got confirmation that help is on its way. The department will soon make announcements in terms of that assistance that is coming our way. And then the last part is on the promotion and growth of the African ship registers. I think that's one of the specific asks from your side, Moderator Mr. Holo. Maybe the starting point is just to once again thank the National Department of Transport for the leadership provided in the development as well as the adoption by Cabinet of the comprehensive maritime transport policy, which is the Bible of our own country on matters maritime transport. And specifically, we looking at a specific statement on page number 53 of CMTP, which looks at the policy that looks at financing, taxation, and other incentives that are required or that can be looked at for purposes of promoting and growing our ship register. And the specific role that SAMSA plays in this aspect is really in line with Initiative 18 of the Operation Pakisa initiatives, which is mainly to support local registry of vessels through incentives and encouragement of using SA flagged ships for cargo and coastal shipping. Now, what has been found to be the main catalyst for ship owners or ship operators to decide to flag their ships, and it's not the only one, I must repeat, but one of the main for making a decision to flag their ships under a certain flag is the incentives that are related to taxation of that ship owning or ship operating company. And we must also commend National Treasury for really assisting and hand-holding both government as well as industry on how our then tax regime could be transformed to be competitive. There's still lots of work that needs to be done, but in as far as international shipping is concerned, a lot of progress has been made, which has led to the introduction of a new section 12.2 in the Income Tax Act of our country, which really brings about not only tonnage taxation, but total exemption on the corporate income tax, on companies that operate in international waters, as well as capital gains tax, interest or withholding tax on interest, and so forth. And some of the primary motivations, obviously, for expanding and developing this maritime industry, which is our country, was more on employment creation and particularly jobs at sea, making sure that there's domestic involvement in the country's import and export supply chains, expansion of the shipping register, which is the topic we're discussing now, investment and development of industries that are peripheral to ship owning and operations, such as insurance and maritime law. We can confirm that at this stage, and I'm sure colleagues would know that building up to democracy in 1994, the ship registry that we had at the time of solid vessels was about 52 ships under the South African flag. And our understanding is that all of those companies left the country building up to 1994, and we were left at some point with almost zero vessels under the South African flag. And that number has been, if we can move over to the next slide, that number has been increased since to about 29 convention vessels now under the South African flag. And obviously, some of the opportunities then that we are left with, colleagues, is that of supporting a number of initiatives that we spoke about that were envisaged at the time, such as the African Ship Owners Association. Currently, we've got pockets of ship owners associations elsewhere in the continent, but we do not have as yet a continental ship owners association that can have a strong voice in terms of representing its members. The Association of African Maritime Administrations I also spoke to, what's required there is making sure that as individuals and as governments and as maritime administrations, we encourage our National Department of Transport as well as our governments to ratify the revised Maritime Transport Charter, which gives birth to the to AMA, the Association of African Maritime Administrations. A lot of funding issues also across the continent, especially for startups and SMMEs, as I think it's an undisputed fact globally that if we're talking new jobs, those are going to come from SMMEs in huge numbers. And then also importantly is the issue of promoting cabotage and private sector operations at national, regional, and continental levels, so as to also take advantage of the intra-trade developments that are presented to us. And I think earlier in the year, colleagues would recall that the National Department of Transport also held a conference in Durban to really rally everybody behind fast-tracking the implementation of the comprehensive maritime transport policy, a session that was immediately followed by the implementation or the establishment of the task forces network, in also working hand in hand with Operation Pagisa. So the task forces are in place to make sure that there is specific focus and industry involvement in the fast tracking of implementing the comprehensive maritime transport charter. And I think this is my last slide, colleagues. If I can, in a nutshell, then say in 3 solid slides that the most important things that we need to do is to establish a continental short sea shipping strategy or enforceable through cabotage, a coastal trade policy to integrate the continent's coastal economies. And this is obviously, colleagues, also dependent on the availability of cargo, which is why it is also very important as well that in the revised Maritime Transport Charter, we also insert, as various countries, a clause on what we call a preferential procurement, to make sure that whether it's boats that are built in Cape Town or anywhere else in the continent, that our first port of call in terms of procurement of such ships is within the continent, that we only go beyond the borders of our continent for such procurements when we cannot find a specific product within the country. We need to promote maritime industrialization program, as well as, most importantly, provide a world-class soft infrastructure development. And importantly, under this one, colleagues, is the intensification of maritime awareness and education across the populace. And SAMSA does this a lot at every given opportunity. It's a costly exercise, but we try to reach out to basic education institutions, primary schools, as well as high schools, to make sure that young ones are really aware of the opportunities that are presented by the oceans, and that we also provide high-tech training and research centers. This is also very important, in that the future seafarer might look very different or slightly different from the seafarer that we have today, obviously with the advent or the gradual introduction of highly automated vessels, and that we also improve participation of women in the maritime sector. And this is my presentation, Chair, and this is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. September. Thank you so much. I think it was a comprehensive presentation and really did justice in understanding of where we are. And the key thing for me, it seems as if everything is set, the MOUs are set, the charters are set, the structures are there, and the one thing you need the most to activate and accelerate it all to come together is funding. And today, you are lucky you're going to be hearing directly from someone who brings joy, Mr. Joy Bapile from IDC, to tell us more of what in his department, in his unit at IDC. I know they're game changers. How do we change this game, Mr. Bapile?
And thank you very much. Very good morning to you. I think it's still morning, and good morning to the participants as well. And thanks, Mr. September, for the presentation. I think mine starts off nicely where yours finished off. I think, with regards to the maritime, the Africa maritime development opportunities that you spoke about, as well as private sector capabilities, that's what the IDC will be touching on. My name, as Mr. Holo indicated, is Joy Balipile. I head up the IDC's automotive and transport equipment, and amongst, the sectors that we cover, other than the automotive, being clearly the auto manufacturers as well as component suppliers to those. We look at the rail side, we look at the aerospace side, and lastly, we look at the maritime side. In terms of the IDC, I won't go through all of these details. I'm also aware of the time. I've been allocated 10 minutes or so. As we would know that the IDC provides, funding to not only entrepreneurs as well as organizations, but we also look at project development in terms of that projects that contribute towards industrialization, whether it's in South Africa or the rest of the continent as well. We provide funding solutions that would include debt, equity, guarantee, or combination of some of these things. As we go to the next slide, Sean. And just in terms of, linking this to the aspirations of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement and the IDCs, I just wanted to touch briefly on the IDC's vision as well as its purpose. As you can see that it talks nicely to our aspirations as a continent, where we want to be, where the AU would like to see us going with regards to, we're saying we want to create globally competitive industries that, realizing Africa's potential. And in terms of our purpose, One, we're saying we want to grow sustainable industries as well as support entrepreneurs, as I indicated, that both our purpose as well as our vision that talks to our aspirations throughout the continent. As we go to the next slide. And I just wanted to give a brief overview in terms of the sectors that we cover and then linking them to the maritime side. I wouldn't go through all of these sectors, but just the ones that specifically talk to us. As you'd remember that South Africa is typically referred to as, the gateway to the continent. And in terms of for we need an efficient port systems as well as its operations. So the IDC has an infrastructure business unit that would look at covering, from an infrastructure perspective as well as the logistics sides that relates to the maritime side. And then we also have a machinery equipment as well as an electronics business unit that would look at supporting entrepreneurs that look at developing any necessary equipment that's used in the maritime side, whether it's hull cleaning or any of the items that linked to shipbuilding and ship repairs. And then my unit, automotive and transport equipment, that's the one that we will also be touching on. We also have an industry planning and project development unit that looks at, from a planning perspective, you'll understand that the world currently is talking about decarbonization as well as environmental sustainability. So there are a few projects that we are looking at, and I'll give an example at a later stage as well. Thanks, Ron. Just in terms of our development envelope, or what the IDC stands for, I think if you look at the panel, we've got a varied team here from with different experiences. But I think one thing that we've got in common, and that's why at the top of that envelope are talking about job creation, that this sector has a potential to create significant number of jobs if we can then, as South Africa and as a continent, support either from a government perspective in terms of incentives, and from entities like the IDC, the DBSA, or other developmental finance institutions in terms of providing innovative funding and financing solutions to support the sector. Then we will see a growth within the sector. And some of them key to IDC's existence, the localization of I think it talks to Mr. September's presentation, which talks to localization of components that could be manufactured in the country. If you look at the sector currently, a lot of the components that are needed for either shipbuilding or boat building are imported. Obviously, we do have localization requirements or items that are designated where you require 60% local content. Entities like the IDC, our role is to ensure that how do we support South African entities to be able to localize as much as possible in terms of the items that we can bring into South Africa. And from an economy perspective, we typically talk about an inclusive economy. That's why you see the 3 blocks at the bottom that talks to transformation. We look at an inclusive economy. We'll talk about the participation of women entrepreneurs within the sector. I think similarly to what Mr. September referred to. So entities that are 25% plus one owned by women entrepreneurs, those would be some of our target market in terms of ensuring inclusivity, as well as youth-owned businesses or businesses that are owned, significantly by entrepreneurs who are 36 years and older. And we also look at supporting Black industrialists. And from our perspective, when we talk about Black industrialists, we are not looking at passive investments. We're looking at, individuals that would be operationally involved in a business. They've got a significant stake in a business. However, that issue of them providing leadership in terms of the business and growing of such, those are some of the characteristics of our Black industrialists that we are looking at supporting. And next slide, please. And just from our key focus area as a business unit, firstly, as I indicated, that we focus on the manufacturing side. We also have another business unit that looks at the infrastructure side. From a manufacturing side, we would then be supporting manufacturers of both and repairing of both ships and vessels. We also look on the ledger as well as sporting boats. We know that South Africa, we've got companies that manufacture world-class products, and only for the export market. I think one of the challenges that we'll indicate also refers to maybe a small market domestically for such products, but those are things that we'd like to grow, as well as I spoke initially about the manufacturing and of components as well within South Africa. And I wouldn't go through a lot of the background information as it would have been covered in the previous presentation. Safe to say that obviously Mr. September spoke about the coastline, I think, in terms of and the opportunities that the 8 ports that we have in the country presents for us. And we think that we are placed in a in a nice route where we can look at those opportunities not only from manufacturing of both vessels in South Africa, as well as the repairs and maintenance of those. We do have capacity, whether you look at from a KZN perspective, the Western Cape, as well as in the Eastern Cape. We do have capacity in terms of but we need to grow it as well, and obviously look at including quite a number of other entities to participate. But as we indicated, in terms of the market, predominantly most of our export revenue is generated on the leisure boat side, but we look at growing the component side as well as growing the other ship as well as vessel building. Next slide, Sean. And I would also not go through the historical numbers. As you can see that, the industry was also obviously impacted by COVID. However, we're seeing quite a nice turnaround within the sector. But I just wanted to talk about, the characteristics in terms of from a sector perspective, which talks to, having to rely a lot on imported component. And that's where South Africa comes in, as well as, if we look at not only manufacturing these components, also within, whether it's within sub-Saharan Africa, looking at opportunities to manufacture some of those components within the spirit of the African free trade continental free trade area agreement, in terms of saying that we can, South Africa, not everything has to come out of South Africa. We can look at opportunities within the continent where, something could be manufactured cost effectively within one part of the continent and then supplied to South Africa. We build the vessels here, as well as some of these leisure boats. There are markets where, whether you go into a Nigeria also, and then we look at supplying South African built entities, as well as so the issue of a supply chain that's reliable, that's going to be key. COVID has taught us that, whether it's in the auto sector, you can see that the sectors have been impacted in terms of their supply chains have been disrupted. The costs of moving these goods from us have obviously increased as well. And I wouldn't go into that local content. Yes, I did indicate that where there is a designation and requirement of a 60%, we need to find a way of supporting that. And typically the projects that we look at, or funding, we understand that typically it could be it takes a long time in terms of lead times, in terms of completing such projects. Next slide, Sean. And I think some of this Mr. September has spoken to, with regards to, we're still a small player in terms of where potential is for the continent and where we should or we could be. So that's why entities like us, as well as other state-owned entities, as well as private sector finance, because from a developmental finance institution perspective, you don't want to go into a project alone. We want to look at opportunities of partnering or crowding in the private sector as well, in terms of supporting the industry going forward as well. And just in terms of we do indicate that the markets are dominated by Asia at the moment, and countries like China of this world. And I mean, with our, when it comes to both global the ship repairs, as well as the refurbished market, still being responsible for less than 1% in terms of the opportunities that are there. We still see quite good opportunities from a South African perspective, and especially to the topic that I spoke about in terms of decarbonization, as well as environmental sustainability, as the world will be going to Egypt in November still, to go to COP27 and discuss those. So those are of interest to us as well. If we move to the next slide, Sean. And just as an example, talking to that issue of environmental sustainability, we would have seen in the media where we talk about, a potential project that we funded with regards to currently being at bankable feasibility stage, where we are looking at, establishing a green ship recycling facility within Saldanha in the Western Cape. The idea being to decommission the vessels in environmentally environmentally friendly manner, as opposed to the current how things are done, mainly within the other Asian countries. So improvement in terms of environmental, as well as being safe, not only for the environment as well as the employees. You would have read quite a bit about accidents that happen in this environment, and South Africa looking at how do we do this in a manner that is not only environmentally safe, however, for the people that we consider key stakeholders being employees in this. And the project, we when it goes into implementation, we estimate that it will be about a 2 billion rand project, and a lot of the opportunities for local procurement with regards to the capex spend that's going to be required. That's something that we trust that when the results and currently everything is moving in the right direction in terms of saying from a South African perspective, in a continent as well. This is something that could potentially be a game changer for us. Thanks, Sean. And I spoke about the trends going forward. Yes, there's a growing demand for movement of goods or trades among countries. The issue of there's e-commerce and goods moving from one place to the other. Those are obviously increasing demand for movement of cargo. But from a South African perspective, having said that, we do not have when it comes to ship ownership as well as operating of these ships, that South Africa, it's still punching below its weight, and we believe that going forward, those are things that we need to look into. And just in terms of the leisure market itself, I did indicate that there we've got like some of the best in the world in terms of what the quality of the product that comes out of this country, and so things that we are proud of. Obviously, looking at the local market, the economy, the way it's performing at the moment, almost firing at the moment. We don't have a lot in terms of domestic demand. So we hope that as time goes on and as things, there would also be, we'd like to see some of these products. If we have made products and over 90% are for the export market, we'd like to see some of those here in South Africa. We'd like to see some of them in Nigeria or elsewhere in West Africa as well, in terms of saying proudly South African built products also being consumed within the rest of the continent. Next slide, Sean. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't go in a lot into that, but just to say that most of that still talks to the issue of inputs being imported, and looking at how we can then ensure that the inputs are manufactured locally, the services are rendered locally as well, and there's quite a bit of a benefit to the local boat building industry as well. In terms of the key trends, I spoke about, the issue of sustainability and the environment, as well as new technologies that are coming through. So we need to keep abreast with the latest technology, where the world is moving to. And this issue of, green steel, green hydrogen, and, cleaner technologies that are currently being used. Those are opportunities that we're saying from an IDC perspective or from a country perspective. Those are, we would not want to be left behind and not move with the curve. Thanks, Sean. And the slide that I really wanted to talk to would be this, in terms of not only do these challenges from an IDC perspective, we're saying, how do we turn these into opportunities? I think, yes, the cyclicality I spoke about that. I mean, if you get one order to build one ship, and the following year what's going to happen, it also has an impact in terms of the employees. You can only keep them for this period of time until you've completed, and then they do not have further opportunities to grow. But how do we grow the market to ensure that we create sustainable employment within the sector? Yes, we did indicate that the sector is small, and we've got a limited number of players in the sector. The issue of the small market I spoke about, and how do we then ensure that we do get local companies or local individuals consuming some of the products that we are providing. And also from a financiers perspective, as I indicated, that we need innovative and funding as well as incentive to support the sector, to understand, the dynamics of the sector, that is not a typical manufacturer where you can just give a 5-year facility, give them a moratorium, and they'll be able, and then you wait and get your return. So that if it's a project-based funding, how do we link it to such, and as I indicated at the beginning, key labor-intensive sectors that we're saying we need to be able to support and obviously grow the sector in terms of employment as well as opportunities for transformation, which ticks in nicely with our developmental mandate. And the demand when it comes to ship repairs as well as maintenance, the demand has been, as I indicated, subdued, which is one of the challenges. However, we're saying that those opportunities we need to, when ships Turkey and South Africa also utilize, the available resources as well as, support for the sector when it comes to infrastructure that's needed, for these facilities that are needed. That's something that we can grow. Sean, thank you very much. Colleagues, thank you very much. That's my presentation from an IDC perspective. I know a portion of it I wanted to go through it quickly, as I know that we still have 2 presenters to go through. Ayanda, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Balepile. I think I'm glad that IDC is active in the space, and I'm going to bring our captain and find out how does she lead Cape Town Port to be one of the best that we have. And I'd really like her to inform us mostly about the role of Transnet in transformation of the maritime industry and the opportunities available, especially for young people and women in this industry. Mr. Balepile said we don't have enough of young people, we don't have enough of localization, and is there as IDC waiting for bankable and viable proposals so that they can really look into them and fund and improve our economy from the sea trade side. So please, over to you, Captain Mthethwa. Please come through.
Thank you very much, Ayanda, for that. The name is Uthokozani Wakamthethwa, and I'm the deputy in the Port of Cape Town, the very windy city that is. And I think taking from SAMSA as well as the IDC, it's clear that there is some commonality in the things that we do as a collective in order to ensure maritime is really seen in every space. I will just go through a few slides. I think they total about 6. That speaks to mandate of Transnet, that speaks to TNPA mandate as well, that also talks to the mission, the vision, and the goals of a TNPA, our functions, our strategic areas, the ports that we currently run, our role, importantly so, in transformation of the maritime industry, our contribution on opportunities for the African youth as well as female, insofar as business in the same industry, and how then do we contact us for any of that. The next slide, please. So the mandate of Transnet, as we know, is that we want at all time to lower the cost of doing business in South Africa. We want to ensure that we are stimulus in the economic growth, and we want to ensure that there is security of provision of all of these appropriate port, rail, and pipelines in the most cost-effective and efficient manner, obviously within the acceptable benchmarks, I think has been spoken a lot through the presenters. In that TNPA, we want to ensure that we have an integrated port system. We want to ensure that we have an adequate, efficient, affordable port, so that again, we stimulate that economy. We want to facilitate transformation. We want to ensure that there is safe, secure, and environmentally compliant ports, and as well as play our authoritative role in influencing the same economy and develop these ports to be self-sustainable. Next one, please. Thank you. And obviously at National Port Authority, our vision is, again, the enablement of a transformed and sustainable world-class port system. And in order to achieve that, our mission is that we want to stimulate a transformed maritime economy through adaptable infrastructure that is fit for purpose. And our goals, one of them that talks to IDC, is to accelerate capital program delivery, improve our efficiencies, empower and have a skilled workforce at that. Again, critically so, lower the cost of doing business and have integrated and modern systems, as well as to retain and attract new business in the same. And some of the values speak again to that service excellence. They talk to innovation, they talk to integrity as well as mutual respect. Next slide, please. And our structure at the moment, we have the ports that obviously form part of the operation, where the heart of the activities happen, where we obviously have our port management. Then we have our regional structure. That is the epicenter of this port manager and the authority. And then we have our head office that assists us in, again, ensuring we have systems that talk to the economic activities. Next slide, please. And our 7 core functions that talk to us as National Ports Authority to be obviously that landlord, to ensure that we plan appropriately for our ports, we improve them, of course, as well as being controller of the ports in terms of navigation, as we know, through our port control centers, to ensure that there is safety and security within our port limits, to also ensure that there are services and facilities that facilitate this business, to also market and administer, so that again we have that efficient running port system. We also want to be a change agent, importantly so that we conduct our business in a very fair and a transparent manner. And lastly, so we want to be a coordinator with state agencies, which we do a lot, and strongly so in liaising with the stakeholders that we have. One of the ways that we've come to do this in our TNPA strategic focus areas, which we have termed as being tips, to ensure that we address a terminal business, so that we address that in our terminals that we license, to ensure that our infrastructure is improved at all times, to have that property, portfolio, and to ensure that we accelerate that. Again, center to us is people, to always ensure that we address any people-related issues, and to have a strong supply chain management, and obviously systems, because we know that that is where the world is going at the moment. Thank you. And in our focus area, we want to have a very strong customer-centric mindset, to ensure again that our people are the ones that are driving us. And in this, we do through strong customer service, again, people, ensuring that our assets are utilized to the best of what they can do, ensuring that there is safety, and of course, cost control, which is very important. Thanks. Next slide. Currently, we have 8 ports, and out of these 8 ports, they vary in their complementary systems that they have, ranging from the port of Richards Bay all the way to the port of Saldanha. I heard also the IDC speak of that green ship recycling that is a possibility, or that they're looking at in the port of Saldanha. Again, just ensuring that there's complementary services, as we are rightfully so strategically placed worldwide. Next slide, please. And one of the things that we do in order to transform this maritime industry is that we have a term where, or rather a concept where, we want to compete if we must, but always we want to collaborate. So that again aligns to the 2050 AIM strategy principles that is termed Think Africa Above All. And each and every one of the 8 ports that I presented to you have got a master plan, as well as a port development framework. That, of course, ensures that we respond appropriately for the growth of this, in order to ensure that capacity is always created. And also, I think, speaking to the IDC is that marine engineering, because we also, in the Port of Cape Town, have a few ship repair facilities where we service vessels not only from Africa, but also worldwide. And obviously, we have a few of these De Beers vessels calling in the port. We also want to ensure that we import and export all of these key commodities, strongly so in the agriculture as well as mining products, to the rest of Africa. And as indicated, the Port of Cape Town specifically is quite geographically and strategically very, very well positioned in order to assist and support this intertrade of Africa. And some of the other ways that we do externally is that we have a few of these SMME workshops. And I think also there was speak of that because we know that that is a very key so far as job creation in South Africa. We also have business to business engagement sessions that we host, a lot of career exhibitions where we collaborate a lot with SAMSA. I also had Mr. September making mention, as well as these institutions of higher learning, local businesses, as well as other ODs that we have. And the ports also open their doors in order for there to be port tours, again, ensuring visibility of maritime to everyone. And we have some CSI programs that we run, and of course, bursaries, of which myself am here due to that. Thank you. And I think in this particular year, being 2022 in July, TNPA welcomed over 300 graduates. And these colleagues are our interns, and this is a 2-year program to address the youth unemployment in South Africa. And also internally, again, we have bursaries in order to capacitate the employees that are already in the system, exposure programs as well, and training and development through our IDPs that we have on an annual basis. And in order for anyone to then get hold of TNPA, we do have our corporate affairs, which is Ms. Tabile Majosi. We also have the Harbour Master being Captain Alexius Mia, and myself, and we also have another deputy being Captain Yul Weli, which is also part of the Harbour Master's office. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Captain Mtetwa. I think you are a full testament that there is work happening. Young people are running with things, and as a beneficiary of the programs of Transnet, I really, really appreciate your work today. But I'm gonna twist things a little bit and just get from the workers' point of view, from the workers' perspective. Mr. Parks will talk about the maritime world. Are workers respected in all that is happening, from policy certainty sides, from ownership sides, and the practices that from the ground more than from the documents that we see? Please share with us, what is it to be done?
Good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks for having us. So my name is Matthew. I'm from the Congress of South African Trade Unions. So I think to answer the chair's questions, are workers' rights being respected? Well, sadly, to be honest, no, especially in this sector. Maybe, Chair, just to take a step backward, to paint a bit of a context, which will inform the conditions workers face. We have a 44% unemployment rate in South Africa, as we know, but it's much worse when you look at youth unemployment. It's about 60%. It means people become desperate. They become desperate for any job. They become willing to sacrifice their legal rights at times. And of course, we remain the most unequal nation. We've seen significant levels of poverty rising. We've also seen over the past decade of corruption and state capture a real declining ability of the state to enforce the law on many fronts. And of course, this becomes much more difficult to enforce the law on the sea. If you struggle to enforce on land, how much more difficult is it on the sea? We've seen at times by many employers across the economy, just a simple defiance of the labor laws, but I think it's much, much worse in the sea. We see very varying levels of unionization amongst workers. So you might find at the ports, there's high levels of trade union membership, recruitment, and so on. But amongst workers who work on the sea, very low. And again, that goes hand in hand with the ability to organize, to unionize, to access workers, to sign them up, etc. We also are witnessing Transnet is facing real challenges, very serious challenges. And of course, I think we must also admit that as maritime nations, we're not equal. South Africa is a middle-ranking power, but we're very small compared to maybe Spain or to Taiwan or to Japan. Of course, we're better off than, for example, Comoros would be or Mozambique would be. I think also, Chair, just to say, what are the labor rights we're talking about? Because I think often we just simply forget what does it mean in practical terms. Well, as the conference has been discussing, the webinar has been discussing, it's the right to work in a safe environment. We saw how important that was over the period of COVID-19. It's the banning of child labor. It's the right for workers to have paid time off, annual leave, sick leave, family leave to take care of a sick relative, maternity or parental leave when your child is born. The limits on how many hours you can work weekly. So in South Africa, you can work 48 hours plus 10 hours overtime. That often doesn't happen in the maritime world. People work much longer than that. The right for workers to join a trade union, to engage in collective bargaining, even to strike. The right for compensation for occupational injury on duty or for unemployment insurance cover. The right to refuse dangerous work, but also critically the right to access labour market institutions, be the CCMA, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, labour inspectors. So all of these things you will find most maritime workers don't have access to it. It's there in paper, it's very progressive, but if we're to be honest, they're not there. Yet we do have a very clear legislative framework from the labour relations point of view. Well, obviously, everything is based upon our constitution, a very progressive constitution. It doesn't say that maritime workers are exempt from it. We have about 6 or so key labour law acts. So the Labour Relations Act about the right to join a trade union and so forth. The Basic Conditions Employment Act, which says what kind of conditions must you work in. Occupational health and safety deals obviously with health and safety of the workplace. We have a National Minimum Wage Act, which includes maritime workers, includes all workers. And of course, if you're injured on duty, the COIDA Act covers you. And if you're retrenched or you go maternity leave or paternity leave, the UF Act would cover you as well. Chair, also beyond that, in terms of this specific sector, we do have the Merchant Shipping Act, from 1951. It has been amended over the years, including quite recently in 2015, 2016. We had seen a merchant shipping bill tabled by the Department of Transport to Parliament in 2020. Haven't seen much movement on it since, but it does speak to the issues of workers in the maritime sector. We have the Maritime Labour Convention, 2006, the Working and Fishing Convention as well in 2007. So the laws are quite clear, the commitments are quite clear, the rights and protections are quite clear, but reality is it's a very, very different one. We see workers being abused all the time. There's often a complete and total disregard for the labor rights, for the safety rights of maritime workers by their employers. There's a real difficulty, a real inability, and to be honest, also a bit of times a lack of interest or thought by the Department of Labour, by government departments to enforce the laws at seas. Of course, also to be fair to government, it's very difficult in terms of resources, in terms of personnel, in terms of intelligence, etc. There's a huge challenge for maritime workers to access trade unions, to access the CCMA or the UIF or Compensation Fund, or even Department of Labour to report abuses they experience. We find many maritime workers are just simply unaware of their labour rights. We've seen a real repeated cases of exploitation, quite blatant exploitation, quite significant levels of abuse of migrant workers. And now we're talking about health and safety. So if you get sick on the sea, so which doctor do you access? You might have to wait until the next port and just hope that it's not too serious. We've also seen, Chair, quite often in Cape Town and other ports, unpaid workers just simply abandoned at the port. Maybe the company went bankrupt, they abandoned the ship, or the ship was confiscated. Whatever happened, but time and again, you'll see maritime workers just simply abandoned. And it's quite horrendous cases where we have maritime workers from the Philippines now stranded in Cape Town. You have often instances where the employers confiscate the passports of the workers to also kind of hold them in a sort of element of a servitude, so to speak. There is real levels of criminality we're experiencing well. I think colleagues would know the issue of transit of Eskom around cable theft. It has a huge, cascading impact upon the ports, the backlogs, etc. There's real problems of corruption too at the ports as well. People demanding bribes in exchange for turning a blind eye to customs duties that are meant to be paid, or even to illegal goods or illegal imports as well. We've seen real problems, and at times it's bursting into violence of trucking companies who transport the goods to the ports, often employ undocumented migrant labor from neighboring states. Simply because they know these workers are so desperate, they're not going to ask for the minimum wage or accept any slave wage. They're not going to unionize or to demand their rights. And of course, this has a secondary effect because an unemployment rate of 44%, or many drivers are unemployed, they will see that employers are choosing to employ undocumented migrant labor. And that does burst into violence. On the maritime sector, there's a real problem in the fishing communities of gangsters taking over quotas for fishing communities. Real problems of Parliament, syndicates, etc., international as well. And of course, Chair, I mean, South Africa, we might think that we have sufficient capacity, but we don't. We see continuously international fishing vessels illegally poaching in our waters. And of course, when we have a South African Navy with about three vessels, two of which are usually not working, with a lack of Coast Guard facility capacity, it's very, very difficult to do it, and these countries know about it, and so hence they know they can come into our waters, and they won't be dealt with. We've also seen real problems of corruption in the allocation of fishing quotas to fishing communities, where you'll find politicians, people from what do you call land-linked cities in Gauteng or wherever, getting fishing quotas, but fishing communities in the West Coast, the Southern Cape, the Eastern Cape, etc., not getting fishing quotas. I think in terms of jurisdiction, look, it is much easier to enforce the laws of the ports than in the sea, for obvious reasons. We've seen the state really struggling to enforce maritime laws. I think there's also an element of confusion at times, and hence maybe not caring about whose laws apply to vessels. Is a South African water sure, but is a boat from Spain? Are the workers from the Philippines or wherever? Or is a ship just simply flying a flag of convenience, be it from Liberia or Panama or wherever? Where is that company which owns the ship actually domiciled? And what about the rights? Which rights are applying to these workers? So you really find these workers are just simply falling through the cracks, not just in South African waters, but across the world. It's been a continuous problem. And I think obviously, as Chair, we also have a real problem about our ability to enforce our maritime borders too. I think the previous speaker did mention about the issue of piracy. Hence, South African Navy has had to deploy to the Mozambique Channel to try to assist Mozambique, Comoros, etc., to deal with the issue of piracy, but we're barely scratching the tip of the surface around protecting maritime borders. Chair, I think you had mentioned the issue of ownership transformation, and we have progressive, broad-based Black economic empowerment laws with various incentives from government. I think we did see some initial good progress post-1994 in trying to transform ownership, some of the fishing companies, Sea Harvest, etc. It's not enough to make a significant dent, to be honest. I think at times we've seen actually falling back at times. I think more critically for us as a trade union is that we really do feel there's a lack of support and often a complete marginalization of traditional independent fishing communities, be it in the West Coast like St. Helena, be it in the Southern Cape, Mossel Bay, wherever, or be it in the former Transkei. Communities who depend upon fishing really struggle to access it and have very little support and really struggle to get quotas, etc. At the same time, Chair, we have, as we know, rapidly dwindling fishing stock, which needs to be allowed to replenish, needs to be given space and protection. And when you have a depleting fishing stock, we need to then prioritize fishing communities who are dependent upon it, legitimate fishing companies. We need to really deal with fishing poaching, especially by international trawlers. And of course, criminality, gangs, etc. And we really see that we are struggling to enforce those kind of ownership rights. Next slide. So I think, Chair, just lastly, in terms of what is to be done, if we were to quote Vladimir Lenin, I think, well, from the trade union movement side, we need to really expand our footprint, not just in the ports, where we are quite well represented, and the rail, but to other parts of the transport, but more critically to fishing and to maritime, where we have tried over the years with varying degrees of success and failure. We think employers also would be better off allowing trade unions to access to unionized workers, because employers benefit from collective bargaining. It's a place for workers and employers to sit down together as an industry to agree minimum norms and standards. It helps to boost labor market stability. It helps to encourage workers to be productive and feel included. It helps workers to raise grievances, and it is a way to improve the company's performance with employers. So it is a beneficial thing. At times you find employers don't want to do so, and it's actually to their own detriment. You can see in the clothing industry is growing because there's a strong collective bargaining between the employer, government, and organized labor. We think there is a need to expand the labor and health inspectors from government side, and even to look at establishing dedicated units to tackle maritime compliance on all levels. There's a need for us to give much more coherent, dedicated support to fishing communities to really see how do we tackle rampant criminality and poaching, and of course to tighten our business liquidation laws, where often you see companies are liquidated and the people put in the front of the queue to get their money is the debtors, is the companies who they owed money to. Workers will be often at the last, at the back of the queue. I think lastly, Chair, is that we have these discussions about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. We need to put there some sort of clause, a social clause, that if you want to get to do trade, you should be in compliance with labor laws, you should be leading by example on good labor practices. So we should take the same principle. If you want to receive fishing quotas or licenses or to do business with the state, there should be some sort of compliance requirements for labor laws and for other relevant laws as well in the sector. So I think that's it in a nutshell, Chair. Hope I didn't take too long, and just to hope we help to raise the views of workers at the sea, at the ports, and in the value chains, etc. Thanks very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Matthew. I think your points about putting the worker and the people that are making sure that the industry runs better and faster, as Operation Pakisa was suggestive of that. The ocean economy is truly our lifeblood in the continent, and I would say in closing that protecting our oceans is everyone's business. It is the workers' business. It is us who have to ensure that environmental laws are adhered to. We need to therefore not just fish everything out of the sea. We do need to make it a much more sustainable manner in doing so. And I think SAMSA have said it all in their presentations, and I really, really want to thank everyone, starting with you, Vusi from SAMSA. I think your presentation really gave us a clarity of what is there, the potential that we can do more. I think the funding is there. IDC, as I said, I know them as game changers, and I'm sure as a country, in part of our economic redistribution, transformation, we definitely need to increase those numbers, but doing so in a sustainable manner. And Matthew is quite right. Workers are the key. If we're not getting it right with the workers, it will be really difficult for everything in the value chain to be correctly and really live to the principles and the values of our constitution. I want to thank Captain Tetwa. I think your presentation was awesome, and I really appreciate your time so that you can give other young people that it is possible, it is happening. Cape Town Port is one of the world-class ports that ensures that out of 4,000 ships that come into this economy, your port really makes it possible. Efficiency is there. I once heard a story that you can probably offload the containers in Cape Town, and if you compare that offloading in Nigeria, you'll be faster offloading all those goods, and they'll be in the market in Nigeria within a week. So I hope and pray that you keep up the good work on that side. But more than anything else, I would like to also thank our sponsors, partners, Mail and Guardian, the technical team, GCIS led and produced all these GCIS's Africa webinar series produced by Meme, Khotsi and her team. I really appreciate to all the presenters. The conversation is not gone. This is the start, and I think we do need to bring these conversations into our daily lives, promote the sea, that our well-being and our economy, reducing that 40% of unemployed young people is definitely going to be coming from our oceans. So with those few words, I really thank you for participating in this conversation. So let me show you the 10 reasons why you should invest in South Africa. Sean, over to you.
Ten reasons why you should invest in South Africa. Number 1, hot emerging market. Number 2, the number 1 diversified economy in Africa. Number 3, the largest presence of multinationals on the African continent. Number 4, progressive constitution and independent judiciary. Number 5, favorable market access to global markets. Number 6, abundant natural resources. Number 7, advanced financial services and banking sector. Number 8, world-class infrastructure and logistics. Number 9, young trainable labor force. And number 10, excellent quality of life.
Plato said, "Who will guard the guardians?" Who are our guardians? Do they care about us? Are they accountable for their actions, or are they above the law? Who elects these guardians? Us? Them? Someone else? And if they guard us, who will guard them? Who will guard the guardians? The Malin Guardian, if you really want to know.